Hey, it's Nathan. Let me ask you something before we start. How well do you really know the quiet ones? The man at the end of the street who waves but never talks. The neighbor who fixes things for free and never asks for anything back. We tell ourselves quiet means simple, harmless, easy to push around. And every so often, life reminds us how wrong that assumption can be. This is a story about a man who repaired clocks for a living in a small county owned, top to bottom, by his wife's family. They thought they had measured him completely. They thought a man that gentle, that patient, that easy to insult at the dinner table had nothing underneath. So when they wanted him gone, they didn't just leave him. They sent a sheriff to kick in his door at 4 a.m, in front of his 6-year-old son, while they lined the street with their phones, recording. What they didn't know is that patience isn't weakness. Sometimes patience is the most dangerous thing a person can carry. Stay with me to the end, because the part everyone remembers isn't the arrest. It's the 2 lines a federal agent read off a file before he stood up straight and changed everything. Emmett Strand woke at the same minute every morning without an alarm, the way some men's bodies keep better time than the machines they own. 4:51. He would lie still in the dark for a moment, listening to the house tick. Marbury was that kind of town, the kind where the loudest thing at dawn was the river, moving past the old mill, and a few dogs answering each other across the valley. He had chosen it on purpose, the way he chose everything, slowly and without telling anyone why. His shop sat on Bell Street, a narrow brick storefront with a hand-painted sign that read, Strand and Son, in gold leaf gone soft at the edges. The and Son was for Milo, who was 6, and could already name the parts of a pocket watch the way other children named dinosaurs: crown, mainspring, escapement, balance wheel. Emmett had taught him that a clock doesn't run on force. It runs on a tiny piece called the escapement that lets energy out one careful tooth at a time, and that the whole secret of keeping time is letting go slowly instead of all at once. Milo liked that. He repeated it to strangers, which embarrassed his mother and delighted everyone else. His mother was Daphne Holloway, because in Sefton County the Holloway name was not something you set down when you married. Even when you married a man who restored grandfather clocks for retirees and charged them half of what the work was worth. The Holloways owned the bank on the square, the development company that had paved over 2 of the 3 orchards Emmett remembered from when he first arrived, and, people said quietly, most of the men who counted votes and signed warrants. Conrad Holloway, Daphne's father, had built that. He liked to say it himself, at the head of every Sunday table, I built all of this, as if the county were a watch and he had wound it. Emmett never argued. He passed the bread, asked Daphne's mother Maeve about her roses, complimented the brisket, and watched. He had a way of watching that nobody noticed, because he made it look like listening. He noticed that Daphne's older brother Bram came to dinner with new dirt under his nails and old anger in his jaw, and that he left early to make calls in his truck. He noticed that the younger brother, Lowell, who ran the bank, had started carrying 2 phones and answering only one of them at the table. He noticed that when Conrad said the word development, his wife stopped chewing. He noticed these things the way he noticed a clock running 8 seconds fast, not as gossip, but as evidence that something inside was worn and pulling against the rest. For 15 years, Emmett had told the same story about himself. Before Marbury, he said, he had done bookkeeping for a firm overseas, traveled a lot, lost touch with everyone, got tired of cities, came home, met Daphne at a charity auction where he'd quietly outbid her family for a broken tower clock nobody else wanted. It was a good story. It was smooth and a little boring, and it closed every door it needed to close. People stopped asking after the first telling. That was the point of a good story. It was a door that locked from the inside. Milo did not know any of it. Milo knew that his father could take apart anything in the world and put it back together so it ran better than before, that his father never raised his voice, and that on Friday nights they ate grilled cheese on the shop counter and wound every clock in the place at once so the whole room ticked like a heartbeat. To Milo, that was who his father was, completely, and it was enough. It would have to be enough, because by the spring, Emmett had begun to notice the worst thing of all. Daphne had stopped winding the clock in their own bedroom. The little brass carriage clock he'd given her the year Milo was born sat stopped at 3:40, and when he reached to wind it, she said, without looking up, "Leave it." He left it. But that night he lay awake past 5 for the first time in years, listening to a house that had gone a few seconds out of time, and understanding, the way he understood machines, that something in his own home had started to fail one careful tooth at a time, and that nobody in that family was going to let it fail slowly. The Holloways did not hate Emmett because he was a bad husband. That was what made it cruel. They hated him because they could not place him, and a family that owned everything could not stand owning a man they didn't understand. It had started small, years back, the way contempt always does. Conrad would introduce him at the country club as Daphne's project. Bram would call the shop the little clock thing, and laugh as if a man working with his hands were a hobby a grown person should have outgrown. At Christmas, they gave him gift cards to stores in cities 4 hours away, the message being that he didn't belong to anything closer. Emmett took it all with the same mild, unbothered smile, and over the years that smile had become the thing they hated most, because they could not get under it. They mistook the fact that he never flinched for the fact that he never felt anything. They were wrong about that, the way they were wrong about almost everything that mattered. What changed contempt into a plan was money, the way it usually is. The development company had overreached. Conrad had borrowed against the bank to buy the whole north bend of the river, betting the state would route a new highway spur through Marbury and make the land worth 10 times what he paid. The spur had been canceled in a committee 3 counties away. Now the Holloways owed more than the county was worth, and Lowell's 2 phones were because one of them was the bank examiner's office, calling about loans that should never have been written. There were 2 ways out of a hole that size: sell, take the loss, and stop being the family that owned everything, or find new collateral, fast, and make the books look like the highway was still coming. Conrad chose the second, because the first was, to him, the same as death. And there, on the second option, sat Emmett Strand, owning free and clear the 1 block of Bell Street the development plan needed, a corner lot his late father, Gideon, had bought in cash and left him in a trust the bank could not touch. The Holloways had assumed for 15 years that the trust was a formality, that Daphne would inherit it, that it was already theirs in everything but signature. It was not. Emmett had read the trust the way he read everything, slowly, and Gideon had written it tight. The lot, and a sum of money larger than anyone in that family suspected a clock repairman could possibly have, passed to Milo, not Daphne, with Emmett as sole trustee until the boy turned 25. If Emmett were alive and free, the Holloways could not touch a brick of it. If Emmett were gone, or declared unfit, control would pass to the boy's mother. Daphne did not decide to betray her husband all at once. Emmett would understand that later, and it would be the only part he ever forgave. It came 1 careful tooth at a time. First it was her father saying the family was in trouble, and she was the only one who could help. Then it was Bram saying Emmett had always been strange, hadn't he? Secretive, who really knew where his money came from, a man like that, around a child. Then it was a lawyer the family kept, explaining over wine how a temporary protective order worked, how a custody question, once raised, was very hard to unraise, how a man arrested in front of his son rarely got that son back. By the time they brought in Sheriff Vernon Cobb, whose re-election the Holloways had funded 3 times, Daphne had stopped thinking of it as ruining Emmett and started thinking of it as saving her family. People can talk themselves into almost anything if the person they're hurting never raises his voice. The plan was simple and ugly. Bram knew a man who could get things. A locked steel box was placed, late one night, in the crawl space under the shop floor, beneath the bench where Emmett worked. Inside it were items that would make any father look like a monster, and any judge sign any paper. Cobb would obtain a warrant from Judge Harlan Wick, who golfed with Conrad every Thursday. The arrest would be loud, public, early, and filmed, so that the story of who Emmett Strand really was would be set in the town's mind before he ever said a word in his own defense. Daphne would have Milo. The trust would have a new trustee. The bank examiner would see a family quietly liquidating a husband's assets to cover its loans and call it a divorce. What none of them could have known, because the only living people who knew it could be counted on one hand and none of them lived in Sefton County, was that the steel box under the floor was not the only thing hidden in that shop. Emmett had hidden something there too, 15 years ago, the day he bought the lot. Not contraband, a number, a single phone number, memorized, never written, that connected to a desk in a federal building. A desk that existed for exactly one reason, in case a man who no longer officially existed ever needed to exist again. He had gone 15 years without dialing it. He had hoped to die without dialing it. But he had also, every single morning, without quite admitting why, kept the habit of noticing, of mapping the worn teeth, of writing nothing down and forgetting nothing. A man can call something a hobby for 15 years and still keep it sharp, the way you oil a tool you pray you never need. The door came in at 4 in the morning. Emmett was already awake. He had been awake since the carriage clock stopped, most nights, and so he heard the trucks before the boots, 3 of them rolling up Bell Street with their lights off, which told him everything. Honest men come with their lights on. He had time to do exactly one thing, and he did it. He went into Milo's room, knelt by the bed, and woke his son gently, the way he always did, with a hand on the shoulder and a quiet good morning, even though it was the middle of the night. Milo, listen to me. Some men are going to come in, and they're going to be loud, and they're going to take Daddy somewhere for a little while. It's a mistake. I'm not scared, so you don't have to be scared. Can you do something for me? Can you count the ticks? Like we do. Just count, and when you get to a big number, I'll be back. Then the front door exploded inward, and the house filled with light and shouting men. Sheriff Cobb came first, weapon up, screaming for Emmett to get on the ground, and behind him, Deputy Wendell Briggs, young, sweating, clearly told this was a dangerous man. Emmett was already on his knees with his hands laced behind his head before they reached him, calm as a Sunday, which seemed to enrage Cobb more than resistance would have. They put a knee in his back and cuffs on his wrists in front of Milo, who stood in his dinosaur pajamas at the top of the stairs, not crying yet, his lips moving. 1, 2, 3, counting. Daphne was not in the house. That was the detail Emmett would keep coming back to. She had taken Milo to her mother's for the night 2 days earlier, and only brought him home that evening, which meant she had known the date. She had wanted him home for this. They needed the boy to see it. Outside, Bell Street was lit like a stage. The whole Holloway family was there, on the sidewalk across the street, in coats over pajamas, every one of them holding up a phone. Conrad stood in the center with his arms crossed, the producer of the scene. Bram was grinning. Maeve had a hand to her mouth in a performance of shock, and there, a little apart, holding her own phone but not quite pointing it, stood a teenage girl, Bram's daughter, Tessa, 16, watching her family film a man being dragged barefoot to a squad car and looking, for the first time in her life, like she was going to be sick. As they folded Emmett into the back of the car, Cobb leaned in with a grin and told him the charge, low, so the cameras wouldn't catch it but Emmett would. It was bad. It was the worst kind of bad. The kind designed so that the accusation alone is the punishment. Emmett didn't react. He looked through the window at his son in the doorway, still counting, and he mouthed 2 words. Keep counting. Then the door shut, and the most dangerous man Sefton County would ever produce let them drive him to the station as if he had all the time in the world. Which, in a way he hadn't needed in 15 years, he did. The Sefton County Sheriff's Station smelled of burned coffee and floor wax, and it was unusually crowded for 5 in the morning, because half the men there had been told they were booking a predator and wanted to look at him. Emmett sat in the molded plastic chair where they cuffed him to a rail and watched them watch him, and felt the old quiet come down over him like a coat he'd left hanging by a door for 15 years and was surprised still fit. They took his belt and his shoelaces and the worn pocket watch from his vest, a Hunter Case Hamilton that had been Gideon's, and they bagged it and made a joke about it. They asked him questions with the camera running, designed to make him angry, and he answered none of them, not because he was hiding anything, but because he had learned a long time ago in rooms much worse than this one that the man who talks first loses. Cobb told him a lawyer would just make it worse. Emmett said he understood. Briggs, the young deputy, kept glancing at him because Emmett did not behave like any guilty man he'd ever booked, and something about that wrongness had begun to itch at him. I'm allowed 1 call, Emmett said finally. His voice was so even that the room quieted to hear it. I'd like to make it now. They walked him to the wall phone, expecting him to call a lawyer, or Daphne, or beg. He dialed a number from memory, 11 digits, no area code anyone recognized, and when it connected, he did not say hello. He said 9 words, slowly, in an order that meant nothing to anyone listening, and everything to the one place it reached. This is Glasshouse. I'm surfacing. I need a wake. Then he hung up, returned to his chair, folded his cuffed hands, and closed his eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, Emmett Strand let himself remember, all the way, who he had been before he learned to fix clocks. He had not been a soldier exactly, though he had trained beside them. He had not been a spy in the way movies meant it. He had been something rarer and quieter, a forensic accountant with a particular gift, recruited young by a federal task force that hunted the kind of criminal who never touches the merchandise, only the money. His gift was patience and pattern. Give him a year inside an organization's books and its dinners and its small talk, and he could draw you the whole machine, every worn tooth, every place it would seize if you removed one screw. He had spent 4 years, not one, inside the largest counterfeit medicine and smuggling network the agency had ever mapped, an empire run by a man named Dorian Slade that had killed people on 3 continents with fake drugs and never once been photographed doing anything but charity. Emmett, under another name, had been Slade's bookkeeper. And on a single morning 15 years ago, every front company, every shell, every bought official in Slade's empire had been served at once, because one quiet man had spent 4 years making sure that when the mechanism finally broke, it broke all at the same time, with no escapement to let the pressure out slowly. Slade was still in a federal prison with no number that the public could call. 41 others had gone with him. Emmett had testified behind a screen, and then the man he'd been had been retired, not with a medal anyone could see, but with a new name, a sum of money, a buried emergency number, and a single instruction: disappear, and never surface unless your life depends on it. He had built Strand and Son on top of that grave. He had married and fathered Milo, and meant every minute of it. He had truly become the clock repairman. That was the part the Holloways would never understand. He wasn't pretending to be gentle. He had earned it. A man who has taken a monster apart screw by screw and watched it fall on 100 guilty people learns, better than anyone, the value of a quiet morning and a boy who can name the parts of a watch. But the number had just been dialed. Somewhere, a desk that existed only for him had lit up, and an old protocol no one had run in years had begun to turn. He didn't know yet who they would send. He hoped, with a small private ache, that it might be someone who remembered. And while he waited, cuffed to a rail in a station full of men who thought they had caught a monster, Emmett did the only thing that had ever truly defined him. He watched. He noticed Lowell Holloway arrive and speak in low tones with Cobb by the coffee machine, the bankman and the sheriff, and he noticed an envelope change hands, and he memorized the time. He noticed Judge Wick's signature on the warrant taped to the booking desk, and the fact that it had been signed at 9 p.m. the night before, hours before any anonymous tip was logged. He noticed everything, and forgot nothing, the way he always had. The man who walked in at 6:40 did remember. He came in alone, in a plain gray suit that fit too well to be local, carrying a thin federal envelope, and he did not announce himself the way important men usually do. He showed a card to the desk sergeant that made the sergeant stand up. He asked, quietly, to see the file on the man booked that morning, and he was handed it with the eager contempt the station reserved for their prize. He opened it standing up, under the fluorescent lights, and he read. His name was Corwin Vale, and 15 years ago he had been the handler who pulled a young accountant out of Dorian Slade's empire alive. He had aged. There was gray in him now and a stiffness in one knee. But he read the first 2 lines of the booking file, the legal name on the warrant, and the address on Bell Street, and the color went out of his face. And then he turned to the page behind it, where the prints had been run, and he saw a flag he had personally placed on a sealed federal record a decade and a half ago, a flag that was never, ever supposed to light up, and he understood that it just had. Corwin Vale set the file down very carefully on the booking desk. He straightened, and then, in the middle of a county sheriff's station, in front of Vernon Cobb and Wendell Briggs, and a room full of men who had spent the morning congratulating themselves, the federal agent came to attention and held it, the way you do for very few things in a life. "Uncuff him," Vale said. His voice was not loud. It did not have to be. "Right now." Cobb laughed, because he didn't understand yet. "Now hold on. That man is charged with... You have no idea who you just grabbed." Vale did not look at Cobb when he said it. He was looking at Emmett, and there was something on his face that none of the deputies could read, something between grief and awe. "No idea." Uncuff him, Sheriff, and pray to God you did it fast enough. And then Corwin Vale crossed the room, and he leaned down toward the quiet man in the plastic chair. And the whole station heard him ask, in a low voice that shook just slightly with the weight of 15 years, the only question that mattered. Strand, my God, where were you for the last 15 years? For a moment, Emmett didn't answer. He looked at the man who had once promised him a quiet life and had, in his way, delivered it. Then he held up his cuffed hands, and Vale fumbled the key from Briggs and got them off himself. And Emmett rubbed his wrists slowly and said, in the same mild voice he used to ask Daphne's mother about her roses, "Fixing clocks, Corwin. I was fixing clocks, until somebody broke one on purpose." What happened in the next hour, the deputies would talk about for years. Vale made calls in the parking lot that lit up offices in 3 cities. By 8 in the morning, the steel box from under the shop floor had been pulled by federal evidence techs who photographed it in place and noted, with professional disgust, that it had been wiped clean of every print except one partial that did not belong to Emmett and would later be matched to a man Bram Holloway had paid in cash. By 9, the timeline of Judge Wick's signature, signed before the tip existed, had been entered into a different kind of file than the Holloways had planned. By 10, Sheriff Vernon Cobb had stopped talking and asked, for himself, for a lawyer. But the part that mattered, the part that turned a wrongful arrest into something the Holloways would never recover from, happened quietly, in a back room, when Vale finally sat across from Emmett with 2 cups of the terrible coffee and asked him what he wanted. Because Emmett could have walked. That was the thing Vale kept saying. The arrest was already dead. The charges were already evaporating. Emmett could take his son and his shop and the agency's apology and disappear again, deeper this time, and let the Sefton County District Attorney clean up the mess with the locals. No one would blame him. He had given 15 years and a whole self to the country already. He had earned a quiet exit. Emmett turned the coffee cup a quarter turn, the way he turned a watch to catch the light on its movement, and he said, "No, you don't understand what they are," he said. "I've been sitting at their table for 15 years, Corwin. I wasn't hiding from them. I was reading them. Slade ran an empire that killed people and never got its hands dirty, and I took it apart by being patient and writing nothing down and forgetting nothing. You know what I've been doing every Sunday for 15 years? He almost smiled. The same thing. They just never noticed, because they decided what I was on, the day they met me, and never looked again. He told Vale about the canceled highway spur, and the loans that should never have been written. About Lowell's 2 phones and the bank examiner. About the orchards paved into a development that was now underwater, and the way Conrad moved money between the bank, the development company, and a charity the family ran. The same shell game shape Slade had used, run by amateurs who thought a small county was too small to be watched. He had it all, not on paper, but in the place he kept things, the place 15 years of practice had kept sharp. He could draw them the machine, every worn tooth, every place it would seize. They built a frame to take my son and my father's land, Emmett said. Fine, let them keep building. The thing about people who think they own everything is that they can't stop reaching. Give them one more thing to reach for, and they'll show you their whole hand. He looked up. I don't want to run, Corwin. I want to be standing in that town when their clock stops, but I want it to be their machine that stops it. Not mine, theirs. Vale, who had spent his career around dangerous men and had thought he'd left the most dangerous one in a quiet town to grow old, felt the hair on his arms rise. What do you need? Time, Emmett said. And for everyone in Sefton County to keep believing I'm exactly what they think I am. A harmless little clockman they almost destroyed. He finally let the smile come. Let me go home, Corwin. Let me be sorry and shaken and grateful. Let the Holloways think they only failed by bad luck, and then watch what they do next. There was one more thing, though he didn't say it to Vale. As they'd walked him out of booking, free, his property returned, the young Deputy Briggs had pressed Gideon's pocket watch back into his hand and held on for a second too long. I knew something was wrong, Briggs had said quietly, ashamed. The warrant, the timing, I knew. Emmett had looked at him and seen a worn tooth that wanted to be replaced. An honest man inside a crooked machine. Then you already know what to do, Emmett had said. Start writing it down. Dates, names, times, and tell no one. Briggs had swallowed and nodded. Emmett had just recruited the inside of the sheriff's station without raising his voice. And outside, in the parking lot, a 16-year-old girl was waiting by his truck, having walked 2 miles in the dawn, holding her phone in both hands like it was burning her. Tessa Holloway had filmed her family the night before, but she had kept the camera running longer than the others. After the show was over, when they thought it was off, and she had recorded her grandfather Conrad laughing on the sidewalk and saying the thing he should never have said where a phone could hear it, that the box had cost almost nothing, that Wick had signed early as a favor, that by Christmas the land would be theirs and the boy would forget he ever had a father. She had not known what to do with it, and then she had watched a federal agent stand at attention for the gentlest man she knew, and she had understood that her family had picked the wrong quiet person. "Mr. Strand," she said, and held out the phone. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were going to." Her voice broke. "I have something. I don't know if it helps." Emmett took the phone the way he took a broken watch from a frightened owner, with both hands, gently, as if it were already fixed. "It helps, Tessa," he said. "But I need you to do something harder than giving it to me. I need you to keep living in that house and saying nothing and acting like you hate me, the way they taught you. Can you do that, just for a little while?" She wiped her face and nodded. "You're braver than every adult in your family put together," Emmett told her, and meant it, and watched the words land in a kid who had clearly never heard them. Then he drove home to his son. Emmett went home and became, for everyone watching, exactly the man the Holloways needed him to be. Shaken, grateful it was over, a little broken. He hugged Milo for a long time on the porch and told him the count was finished, that he was back, and Milo, who had genuinely gotten to 400 and something before his grandmother took him away, told his father the number with enormous pride, and Emmett wrote it on the shop chalkboard and never erased it. Daphne came home that evening, and the conversation between them was the quietest war ever fought. She had clearly been told the arrest had collapsed on a technicality, some federal mix-up, embarrassing for Cobb, nothing to do with the family. She did not know about Vale. She did not know about Tessa's phone, or Briggs's notebook, or the back room. She watched her husband for any sign that he knew what she had done, and Emmett gave her none. He let her see a man who believed he had simply gotten unlucky and gotten saved. He thanked her for handling Milo. He apologized, God help him, for the trouble. And he watched the relief move across her face and understood that the woman he had loved was, underneath, a Holloway after all, and that some clocks cannot be repaired, only stopped. It was the only part of the whole thing that ever truly hurt him. Then he went to work, not at the bench, on the machine. He had Tessa's recording, which named the box, the judge, and the timeline in Conrad's own voice. He had Briggs on the inside, now keeping a careful federal-grade log of every favor that crossed the sheriff's desk. He had Vale and a task force who had pulled the file on the Holloway Bank and found, exactly where Emmett said it would be, loans written against land worth a fraction of their value, and moved in circles through a family charity, the same shell-shaped Dorian Slade had used, built by people arrogant enough to think no one was watching a place this small. And then Emmett did the thing he was better at than any man alive. He waited, and he let them reach. He let Conrad believe the danger had passed. He let the bank examiner's questions keep arriving, knowing that a cornered Conrad would do what cornered men do, move faster, hide harder, pull more people into it to spread the risk. Through a lawyer named Harriet Ing, whom Vale quietly arranged and the Holloways assumed Emmett couldn't afford, Emmett filed one small, irresistible piece of bait, a notice that the Bell Street Trust, Milo's trust, was considering selling its corner lot. The exact lot Conrad needed, the exact lot that would let the development books look alive again for one more quarter and buy the family time with the examiner. Conrad couldn't help himself. It was the worn tooth Emmett had been counting on for 15 years of Sunday dinners. The family moved to buy the lot through a chain of shells, overpaying wildly to disguise the loans as a real sale. And to do it, Lowell had to wire money in a pattern that connected the bank, the development company, and the charity, in a single afternoon, on the record, into a transaction with a federal assets trust that was, by then, being watched by people Lowell had never heard of. They reached for the one thing Emmett dangled, and in reaching, they put every worn tooth of their machine into mesh at the same moment. That was all the escapement the feds needed. With the wire complete, the loans documented, Tessa's recording authenticated, Briggs's log corroborating Cobb, and Wick's pre-signed warrant time-stamped, the whole thing could be served at once, with nothing to let the pressure out slowly. Emmett knew, better than anyone, that this was the only way to take down people who owned everything, not in pieces they could survive, all at the same time. He asked for one thing from Vale, that it happen on a Sunday, at the house, at dinner. It came in with its lights on. The Holloways were at the table, all of them, when the federal cars and the state police rolled up the long drive in daylight. Sirens off but lights turning, honest and unhurried. Conrad stood up from the head of the table where he had said, "I built all of this 1,000 times," and watched agents come up his own front steps. They had warrants this time signed by judges 4 counties away who had never golfed with anyone in Sefton, for bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and, for Bram and Conrad specifically, for conspiracy to manufacture evidence and falsely imprison a federal witness, a charge with the kind of weight the family had thought they were putting on Emmett. And the street filled with phones again. The neighbors, the ones who'd watched a clock repairman dragged out barefoot, came out onto their lawns and lifted their cameras, and this time they filmed Conrad Holloway being walked to a federal car with his hands behind his back, and Bram shouting, and Lowell already talking, already trying to trade, already naming Cobb and Wick to save himself. The machine eating itself exactly as Emmett had known it would once. A single screw was pulled. Maeve stood in the doorway with her hand to her mouth, and this time the shock was real. Emmett was not there. That was deliberate. He was at the shop with Milo, winding clocks, when Vale called to tell him it was done. He thanked him, hung up, and stood for a while in the ticking room with his hand on his son's shoulder. He did not feel triumphant. He felt the way he felt when a long, difficult repair finally caught and the movement began to run true. A deep, tired rightness, and a little sorrow for all the broken parts that hadn't survived. Daphne was not arrested. The evidence put the scheme on her father and brothers. She had signed nothing, moved no money, and her crime, the real one, was the kind no court tries. But the marriage was over, and they both knew it, and the custody question the Holloways had raised to take Milo away now answered itself in the worst way for them. A father wrongfully arrested by a corrupt sheriff at his family's direction does not lose his son. Emmett did not fight for full custody to punish her. He fought for it because of the look on Milo's face the morning the door came in, and because some things, once a child has seen them, a parent has to make sure never happen again. He won it without raising his voice, the way he won everything. Sheriff Vernon Cobb took a plea and a prison term. Judge Harlan Wick resigned in disgrace and followed him. Wendell Briggs, the young deputy who had started writing things down, testified plainly and well, and was, the last anyone heard, running for sheriff himself on the only platform that ever really matters in a small county, that the law should not be for sale. Tessa Holloway, 16, who had kept her camera running, finished growing up in a quieter house, and came by the shop sometimes on Saturdays, and Emmett taught her the parts of a watch: crown, mainspring, escapement, the piece that lets the pressure out one careful tooth at a time, so the whole thing doesn't fly apart at once. She was good at it. She had the patience. Corwin Vale offered Emmett a way back in, of course. The agency always does, when it finds a tool that good still sharp. Emmett walked him to the door of the shop, where the gold sign read Strand and Son, and he turned down the country, kindly, for the last time. "I already have the only work I want," he said. He nodded at Milo, asleep on a cot in the corner under a wall of ticking clocks. "I let things out slowly now, Corwin. One tooth at a time. Turns out I'm better at that than I ever was at the other thing." And on the chalkboard behind him, never erased, was a number in a child's handwriting. 412. The count his son had reached, in the dark, waiting for his father to come home. Emmett kept it there for the rest of his life. The only record he ever did keep. The proof that the most dangerous thing he had ever done was also the simplest. He had come back. Nathan again. I think about Emmett's escapement a lot, that little piece that lets the energy out one tooth at a time. Because that's really what this whole story is about, isn't it? The Holloways wanted everything all at once. The land, the boy, the win, and people who reach like that always put their whole hand on the table eventually. And the man they underestimated had spent his entire life learning the opposite skill. How to wait, how to notice, how to let a thing fall apart in its own time instead of forcing it. Here's what stays with me. Emmett's real power was never the secret past, the federal agent, the classified file, the salute in the station. All of that was just the reveal. His actual power was the thing he practiced every ordinary Sunday for 15 years, sitting quietly at a hostile table, paying attention, judging no one out loud, and forgetting nothing. He was dangerous because he was patient and observant, and kind enough that nobody bothered to be careful around him. That's a real thing, and you don't need a classified file to have it. So if you take anything from this one, let it be this. Be careful how you treat the quiet people, because quiet is not the same as weak, and patience is not the same as fear. And if you are one of the quiet ones, the ones who get talked over and underestimated and called somebody's project at the dinner table, understand that the attention you pay, the steadiness you keep, the things you notice while everyone else is performing, those are not small. Those might be the most powerful things you own. Thanks for staying to the end. If this one got you, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next story.